Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that with respect to this bill, and certainly with respect to this sector, there is scope and there's perhaps the necessity to put all of these efforts in perspective. This bill that is before the House really addresses a small part of the needs of the sector, of the gaps that currently exist in the sector. And in fact, I would like to encourage the government, the cabinet, the ministry to begin the process of putting everything in perspective for the people in Barbados. Because the water sector, as the member who spoke before me, spent some time clarifying, it is the most important resource that we have. And I make this appeal because, for that very reason, I make this appeal because we want the partnership of Barbadians in making sure that this sector begins to take on some sustainability. We want the collaboration and the solidarity of Barbadians in matters of conservation, some having already been announced. But in order for that solidarity to take place, people need to understand the landscape. They need to understand what is coming. They need to understand what will affect them. They need to understand what they will be allowed or disallowed from doing. And they need to understand what are the financial implications that may affect them. They also need to understand some of the bread and butter issues that affect the sector. So let me start by saying that I think it's important to clarify, to make clear that this bill and its purpose relate to essentially commercial production of treated wastewater. I say that because I feel that people may wake up tomorrow and hear the honorable member who led the bill and hear perhaps 30 seconds or 45 seconds of her very expansive presentation and not have the full benefit of it, and may be led to the conclusion that this will affect how they use water in their homes. And what I am seeing before the House is something that does not address that, but addresses the companies, the entities that are in the business of treating wastewater for on-selling or for onward provision to other users. And I think to support that, what perhaps I would like to understand, or would have liked to understand, is really what is the size of the sector? How much water are they currently producing? What is the percentage that they are currently contributing? Whether there is scope to contribute more as a result of this legislation being passed. That's something that I would certainly like to understand. What is the size of the sector? Who are the clients? Who stands to benefit? And so on. I think I would also, sir, like to understand and like to know, and I suspect this will be the subject of the regulations that will attach to this legislation, whether there are certain categories of use that will mean that these categories or these intended purposes would need to be treated to different standards. So that, for example, if there is water that is going to come into contact with human beings, whether that is washing your car or something else, whether that's a different standard or a different use or a different category from water that will just flush toilets, and therefore it will not come into contact with my skin or with my hands. Or so to understand, and perhaps this is contemplated in the regulations, but to understand whether there are categories of that water, so that these companies that are treating that water are treating it to various standards. And if not, then to also understand that if we're talking about one treatment standard for these different uses of water. But beyond that, sir, I do think that we need to understand, we would wish to understand the overall lay of the land with respect to the sector. I do recall that some time ago there was an effort or an intention to create a water sector master plan or something of that nature, so that all of these different bits of, not just legislation, because legislation is not there for the purpose of legislation in itself, but all of these different parts of these different considerations for the provision of water to Barbadians, that we could all understand how they fit, and we can all see what needs to be done. And so I do not know if there's still that intention to create that. My nomenclature may not be accurate, but something that amounts to a water sector master plan, if that is in the works, so that it will show us what are the different parts that relate to the sustainable provision of water to the country. I think that would be useful if it is still in the works. But there are all kinds of other parts that relate to this. And I do want to say that these efforts in part relate to not just making sure that we have greater access to water. And so being able to treat wastewater and have it used for things other than drinking is important. But there are all kinds of other things that contribute to this goal. And I know, for example, that the Barbados Water Authority and the ministry have water loss reduction as one of its targets. In other words, how do we go about making sure that we don't continue to lose water through leakage in pipes and mains? But we also have to be concerned with losing water at the level of the household. And sir, I must always, in these conversations, represent the concerns and the difficulties of the people of St. Michael South Central who have sent me here. And with respect to the issue of water loss reduction, I have constituents who are from time to time confronted with astronomically high water bills. They manage to show the pattern of those expenditures or the pattern of those charges, and to say, well, in March, it was $80, and then in April, it was $2,080. And I look at that pattern and I think, well, something has gone terribly wrong here. And I seem to recall, and I put these things on the table not to suggest that I am right, but as an appeal for some information and clarification. I seem to recall some time ago that the Water Authority used to give some assistance to householders in helping to figure out the source of the leak if they thought there was one. I do not think that that practice continues. I think that there was some time ago a policy that suggested, well, if the leak happens on our side, as in off the premises of the householder, then that's something that we can check. If the water loss is with our infrastructure, if the water loss may perhaps be at the level of the household, then we're not able to give that assistance. Again, I put that on the table to be subject to correction if correction is needed. But it seems to me that householders are experiencing challenges when it comes to not understanding the source of their leaks. There are cases where people say to me, and in many cases I'm talking about pensioners, people 85, 90 years old, who are saying, well, they said I need to call a plumber myself. I called a plumber, he can't find anything, the bill come in the next month for $4,000. They insist that their usage does not warrant such a charge, and they are at a loss as to what they can do. I seem to recall the minister, the honourable member for St. Michael Southeast, did acknowledge that this was a challenge that was presenting. And I make the point again to keep it front of mind for the Water Authority and the ministry, because if water loss reduction is one of the targets, then it has to be done in such a way that it also directly benefits the people of Barbados. And so that it is not an academic exercise, but it is something that they can see the benefit of, not just in terms of the sustainability of water in general, but in their own bottom line and what they are paying or able to pay. But sir, I call for this sector to be mapped out for Barbadians so that we can understand the intent and the direction, because I am aware that there are other issues. I am aware that the Water Authority and the ministry are exploring, finalizing at different stages of settling these issues. But I do think that each time we bring legislation on a different piece, it starts to raise a lot of questions about the other pieces. So for example, having formerly had responsibility in part for planning and development, physical planning, the issue of water zones has been vexing. The issue of how are we zoning the country, what are the implications for the erection of sewage facilities at the level of the household or independent sewage facilities to which households can be connected. It is something that from time to time pops up, starts to occupy the public discourse, and we determine that we will wait to discuss the legislation or we will wait for further clarity. But I do believe that the time has come for us to understand the direction in the sector. And so these bits all fit together. So the issue of the water sector master plan would start to help us map that out. It would show how does the water reuse bill that we are discussing today contribute to the objectives that we have in the sector. It would discuss how does the water zoning bill or the Barbados Water Authority Amendment Bill also contribute to those objectives that we have. But I say all these things, sir, because I think that while this legislation is desirable, from where I might sit as a Barbadian, as somebody who is looking on, wondering, how does this affect me? I see the creation of committees, I see the establishment of guidelines, I see an official process being created. And that's fine, official processes are necessary. What I don't hear is, when will I be able to have some agency as a citizen? When will I be able to do something about my own access to water in my house at the household level? And I think that's really what we want to understand. Issues that relate to rainwater harvesting and potable water storage are, I would say, top of mind for many Barbadians. We want to know, under what arrangements can we catch water at the level of the household, catch water on the roof, catch water in a tank, and have it be useful to us in our homes? What would that require? We know, and the minister, the honourable member for St. Michael Southeast made reference to it earlier, we know that it will require us being able to install and implement dual reticulation plumbing systems, which means that there's separate plumbing for non-drinking water that there is for water that we're going to drink. We know that the plumbing code that was mentioned earlier is meant to advance this process. However, there is a bit of a breach between where we are now and where we are going, and perhaps some steps that we can take until we get where we are going. I am not sure that Barbadians understand the current guidelines or requirements with respect to having a water tank at your house. I know that under the old planning legislation, there was just the requirement to have a tank of a certain capacity. Not much else was required at the time, not much else was associated with that, whether it needed to be hooked up, how would this water be tested, what were some of the other requirements to make sure that the water stayed clean, and so on. And it led to some confusion with respect to what householders needed to do. But I think that even now, even as we settle some of the requirements, there is space for a conversation on what is it that we want every Barbadian to be able to do at the level of the household. How much water do we want people to be able to store? By what means? How much water do we want people to be able to harvest, as in to catch, to be able to treat in a way that they can at the level of just a householder? What can it be used for? And where are we going? Where are we going with respect to the regulations around this? What will the Planning and Development Department require of householders in the future with respect to the sustainability of water and making sure that in the event of outages, in the event of ruptured mains, in the event of natural disasters, when the water supply may be knocked out, what are we asking householders to be able to do? But further to that, what might be the financial obligations on householders to do that? I know that part of that process is to be able to understand what is required for this dual plumbing system, what is it likely to cost. But I also seem to recall that as part of the $27.6 million grant from the Green Climate Fund that is meant to execute a project called the Water Sector Resilience Nexus for Sustainability in Barbados project, that they're involved in that project was an intent to be able to use some of these savings from having photovoltaic energy generation, use some of the savings from that renewable energy in the water sector to be able to contribute to a revolving fund so that potentially those Barbadians who will need to retrofit their homes with this dual reticulation plumbing would then have the opportunity to do so through some kind of financial arrangement. I raise these issues, sir, because I don't want them to slip from view. I think that the question of having each household having their own access to the water that is falling above their heads is the next level of progress and development in the sector. And so this issue of rainwater harvesting for reuse at the household level is perhaps where we need to be able to bring utility to people. I would say further, sir, that with respect to the issue of reduction of water loss, There are several other initiatives of the Water Authority and of the ministry that I also think needs to be put in very sharp relief for people to understand. So in other words, there's a lot that has to be done in the sector. There's a lot that is being undertaken by the Water Authority. But overall, it needs to be made clear what might be the financial implications for every Barbadian. But beyond that, what are the benefits to be had from the kinds of initiatives that the Water Authority and the ministry are involved in? I know, for example, that when it comes to the issue of the plumbing code, it will then start to raise other questions of a general building code and whether this remains contemplated. How will these two things relate? Really, sir, what is the landscape? What does it mean for the kinds of businesses I can have attached to my home if I'm in a particular zone of the country? What does it mean for sanitation opportunities? What does it mean for being able to develop housing projects in a certain area? So, sir, I think that we are going in the right direction. I believe that this water reuse bill starts to show the intent of the ministry and the Water Authority, but I must always come back to the issues that are affecting people every day. Not just the ones that are affecting them today, but the things that are going to give each Barbadian, not just a commercial sector, but each Barbadian the wherewithal to have some agency and to be able to control their own access to water. I know we have a ways to go, but sir, I am always cautious when I see legislation that creates official processes and does not let us see beneath them to understand how the government is putting people in the position to have greater access to water, to be able to meet their own commitments, because the Honourable Member for St. Michael South East made reference to the fact that the only way the Water Authority can deliver is if its financial commitments are met through the payment for the utility. This is true. So then, let us put people in the position to meet those commitments. Let us make sure that we don't have householders who do not understand the source of their leaks or why their commitment seems to be far above what their usage is. And I think it goes beyond the issue of public education. I think that sometimes Barbados is small enough, we have that benefit. Barbados is small enough that being able to engage with people directly, being able to explain to people, well, this is what you are doing that you should not be doing. We have had that model with our environmental health inspectors. We have that model here in this bill with people who will visit these entities and require certain information of them. Let's not only visit or have an interest in the commercial entities, but let us also understand that people, in order to be able to do the right thing, we also have the scope and capacity to put them in the position to do the right thing, to be able to meet their commitments, to be able to pay those financial commitments so that they do not then have the issue of being disconnected. And sir, you know, these issues do not stand on their own, and I sympathize often with the Water Authority, because issues of water and land in this country are inextricably linked. And we have, as a part of our development process, to perhaps once and for all be able to settle issues of land tenure, of land ownership, of how can people prove ownership, how do we support estate planning and making sure that when I pass on a property to my grandson, that I have the paperwork in place so that he can prove that this property is his, and so he doesn't have the complication of not being able to show ownership and therefore not having water reconnected. These issues are all linked. And we are now, sir, several decades post-independence in a position where we have another tier of basic development in which to engage. We went through a process of dealing with basic needs like food and water and workers' rights, and we, as a small country, led social development in a number of areas. We continue to do so. For example, with the child protection and child justice bills that are before committee now. We continue to lead on these things. Let us not lose momentum. Let us not fall behind, because basic issues that relate to water supply, basic issues that relate to land ownership start to get away from us, such that Barbadians start to feel dispossessed once again. These issues, sir, as I close, are not straightforward. Being faced with having to replace almost all of the mains and pipes and connections underground in a country as populated as it is cannot be easy. Being faced with persistent drought as a result of the climate crisis, and seeing the rainfall and having people think, oh, well, the rain falling, so the drought is over, when in fact that is not the case. Being faced with all these things, sir, I don't want to give the impression that it is easy. It is not. It is difficult. I believe that in order to ease the transition, in order to put people in a position of feeling like they understand and they're not afraid and they don't know when government is going to get up tomorrow and come with another committee, in order to ease that anxiety, let us all see and understand what is the intent of the sector. Where are we going? We have South Coast tertiary treatment plants. We have sewering of the Bell and other under-sewered, under-sanitized housing developments. We have water zoning. We have rainwater harvesting and potable water storage. We have a set of things that together will put us on very solid footing. I'm just asking that we be made to understand fully what that footing looks like, and furthermore, perhaps more importantly, what it requires of every Barbadian, and how will the government support those efforts at the level of each individual. Sir, I support this water reuse bill, and I look forward to having the fuller plan before us for consideration. I'm obliged to you.